Look, I'm sure you've heard this phrase before. If you haven't, good. Teardrop in an ocean of indifference. I repeated it again. Teardrop in an ocean of indifference. I want to discuss the concept of empathy and how empathy is disappearing in a period of individualism where there does not seem to be any reference points for individuals and communities. What do I mean by reference points? In the Western world, the so-called liberal democracies, what we have is a crisis. And that crisis is caused by the triumph of individualism in all human relationships. Empathy is a human characteristic which has been used to maintain cohesion, whereas the people from a same faith, religious faith, or the same nationality, or the same gender, empathy has been the glue that has held society together when it required collective effort for communities to survive. Now, obviously, there's the empathy for close family members, and that empathy dissipates as people get further and further from that biological source. Now, the reason I'm raising this particular issue is that for the first time in human history, we can instantaneously see mass destruction and death on a 24-hour news cycle. And it's very easy to think those images are nothing more than images. Now, one of the most, I think, harrowing, also more important statements made during the Gaza catastrophe, and it is a catastrophe, was when a woman whose baby has been blown to bits said, "We are human beings, not animals." And that is the key to empathy. In Western societies, we show more empathy to our pets than we do to human beings outside our immediate family circle. And we saw this during the Morrison-Howard era, when the discussion was all about leaners and lifters, as if there were huge numbers of people that were ripping off the system. They were leaners. I mean, robo-debt, the robo-debt fiasco, was a logical consequence of that type of mentality. And the lack of empathy causes destruction. It destroys the ability to work collectively to resolve problems which individuals cannot address, let alone resolve. in the individualist mode, the only thing that's of importance is the individual. And the fallacy of this is that the individual, especially in a Western society, is able to be an individual because of the protection which is afforded to the individual by the state and a social security system, where the individual no longer has to rely on immediate family in order to survive and prosper. The rise of social media, or I should say asocial media, has destroyed the concept of empathy. We now see images as nothing more than entertainment. Murder, destruction, torture, pain. It can be served up to us as entertainment. So when we look at the horrors in Gaza, where 2 million people are nothing more than hostages to the Israeli state, where over 60,000 have been murdered, people like to use the word killed, murdered, in the last 16 months, where another 100 to 150,000 have died because of lack of basic resources like basic medications, things like insulin, blood pressure medication, and the list goes on and on. And the reality is that the lack of empathy which has been shown to this situation by Australians is extraordinary. In many ways, it mirrors the lack of empathy which is shown to First Nations people in this country, where the discussion is that their problems are created by themselves, that they have nothing to do with the colonial process. So individualism can and does widen separation within society. It widens the gap. It breaks down social cohesion. It reduces everything to a transactional equation. Now, the election of President Bufalini, the buffoon who masquerades as Mussolini in the United States of America, highlights the extent to which individualism has destroyed any idea of empathy, whether it's for your own people or people outside that particular network. And that's the key. I mean, the old saying about the way you judge a society is the way they treat the most marginalised holds true. And the cult of the individual, which is expanded and pushed by things like TikTok and YouTube, destroy the ability to have social cohesion. And social cohesion is fundamental to create a society which is not plagued by violence and a lack of empathy. When you have a lack of empathy to a particular subgroup or a particular group in society because of their race or their religion, because of their gender, their sexual orientation, then you realise that we have major issues. Because with the lack of empathy comes the beginning of the disintegration of society as we know it. Now, the social security system was introduced for one very good reason, not only to show empathy to people in difficult situations, but to act as a buffer between society breaking down because those who had a monopoly on the use of force could not successfully use that force to destroy opposition. So in 2025 we are faced with a huge problem. Why is empathy no longer an important feature of our society, especially when it's related to people outside our immediate circle, our immediate family circle, our immediate circle of friends? Why is it that we, as a society, can accept atrocities that occur around the world without showing any empathy for that situation? And that is a critical question we need to look at. Because if we have a society where a tear drops into an ocean of indifference, what we are creating is the condition for the disintegration of that society and the formulation of issues, a formulation of ideas which will not be able to tackle the issues that we need to tackle on a daily basis. Reality has a nasty habit of biting us. Nature doesn't have empathy in its DNA. Nature is nature. There are consequences. You're annoy a poisonous snake, and that poisonous snake will bite you, irrespective of whether you're a child or an adult, irrespective of your sexual preference, your religion. That's the reality. As human beings, especially as human beings that have an international reach, where we know what's happening in almost every corner of the planet, we now face the dilemma of the triumph of individualism and the destruction of collective responses to the issues we face, not just as families or members of a local community or part of a nation state, but as human beings. Now, it's interesting that in a period where private capitalism has understood that the way to increase profits is to globalise and internationalise and to corporatise, that we are moving in the different direction. That we, through social media, the government gilded Australian Broadcasting Corporation and the privately owned legacy media, that we have created a society of silos where there is no mixing. The dilemma in this country is the fact that we have private sector and a public sector as far as health and education is concerned. And especially in education, having a private sector creates a situation where there is no empathy for anybody outside that sphere. And that's the dilemma. If different types of people don't mix, if they don't talk to each other, if we rely on individualism as the be end of living, that we think we can satisfy all our needs through individual action, we create these silos where we look for people with similar ideas, similar concerns, and converse with them and them only, thinking or saying that everybody else is the problem. And that's what we have today. We have a society that has been manipulated by politicians who will be, asking you for their vote in the next few months, who are more than happy to stir the pot, are more than happy to provide individual solutions to social problems which need social solutions and collective problems. Although many conservative commentators, including political leaders, believe there is no such thing as society, ultimately the difference between us and the animal kingdom and the insect kingdom, the difference is our ability to work collectively. Nothing highlights this more than the threat of a natural disaster, as we've seen in southeast Queensland in the last few days. The fact is that no one is an individual. We all stand on the shoulders of hundreds of people, thousands. The ideas I talk about are not my ideas. They're not new ideas. They're part and parcel of that human journey from the cave to a urbanised existence. And the fact is that without empathy and without collective action and collective effort, there is no future for all of us. Not just you and me, but our children, grandchildren, our neighbours, the people across the ocean. And that's why internationalism is so important. The fact is, the suffering you see on social media, the suffering you see around the world by people trying to survive in situations where war is their constant companion. What we see, there are no individual solutions. And that's why I encourage you to tear up your membership card of the somebody should do something about that tribe, and the membership card of that I'll do something in the future about that. The fact is, empathy is a critical component of any reform or revolutionary movement. Without empathy, there is nothing.